Welcome to the Whispers of the Smoky Mountains podcast. This is your host, Kaylin Cole, and this is
Randy Bethea.
Randy Bethea is one of the only African American drivers to compete in NASCAR from East Tennessee. He is only one of 7 African American drivers to ever compete in the NASCAR's highest level, the Cup Series. Randy, when did you start racing and why?
I started racing in 1967 at the Tennessee or Carolina Fairgrounds, but the why is I've just always, from early age, always been around race cars thanks to my brother, and I developed an interest in it and just decided I wanted to do that. So that was my goal. I mean, from early on.
When you mentioned your brother, what do you mean your brother?
My brother, my blood brother, he and I used to, if we left home together, we had to return home together. And he was older than I by 3 years, and he would take me places that I didn't really want to go. And the racetrack was one of them. I didn't care anything about racing because the races were late, and I wanted to be home and not have to face a whipping because we got a lot of those. So it was just something that I wasn't interested in at that time, at that moment. And he consistently did me that way. And then he got acquainted with some of the race car drivers at the racetrack, and we ended up at their shop. So, which wasn't far from where we lived. And my interests started developing, and I just got hooked on it. We would work cleaning the shop, handing tools, holding lights, just doing stuff that people today still do, you know, that are trying to develop their way, but anyway, that's where it came from. That's where my interest came from.
How many brothers and sisters did you have?
There was 11 kids in my family. There was a race car, well, not a race car, it was a street car it was a 36 Ford that sat behind Roy Trantham's shop. Roy was one of the people that we worked with, hung around and worked for. And the car was just sat there for years behind his shop. And I would spend so much time in that car just racing. The car never moving. I was just racing in that car because that was what I wanted to do, you know. That car's still around today. It's been restored, and it's a fine car right now. But that was I could say that's where my racing started. Was in that 36 Ford behind his shop.
Can you tell me a little bit about Roy and where Roy was from and where you're from?
I'm from Nashville, North Carolina, and so was Roy and Roy Trantham and Banjo Matthews. Banjo was a legend in NASCAR. For whatever reason, he's not made it to the Hall of Fame yet, but he should, and hopefully one day he will. But Roy, I worked for him. Well, I'd worked for Roy for a while and worked for Banjo for a while. And I'd get mad at one of them and go work for the other one. And so it was just a back and forth thing. And I was just a kid, just handing tools and doing stuff. I guess I took more of a liking to Roy, or as far as working for him, because I had more opportunities to do stuff with Roy than I did with Banjo. Roy would take me to the races with him. I was, 10 years old, 12 years old or something, I don't know. and we'd go to the races, to some of the places that wasn't really friendly to me, but nevertheless we'd go, and it always worked out. And Roy he was just always there for me, during those times.
Escape the ordinary and embark on a coffee adventure with Snowbird Mountain Coffee Company, nestled in the heart of Newport, Tennessee and Morristown, Tennessee. Our coffee company is dedicated to crafting exceptional blends that capture the spirit of the mountains in every cup. Try our seasonal drinks, Pot O' Gold, Back That Lass Up, Can't Pinch This, Shake Your Shamrocks, and Happy Go Lucky. Our host Kaylin Cole's favorite drink right now is Back That Lass Up. It's a spiced brown sugar cheesecake latte with a yummy pistachio cold foam. Visit us at our locations and let the warmth of our coffee embrace you. Elevate your mountain coffee experience with Snowbird Coffee Company, where every cup is a journey into the Smoky Mountains. How did you get to Newport from Asheville?
Roy had another person that worked for him. His name was Eddie Gardner. Eddie and Roy on a trip to either Newport or Smoky Mountain Speedway in Miracle. I'm not sure which one. Eddie met and married a girl from here. And he asked me to help him move over here from Asheville. Now, this was kind of all behind Roy's back. At that time, Roy didn't know. Well, he knew they got married, but he didn't know about the move and all that stuff. But anyway, we moved over, or I helped him move over. And I told Mother I was going to do that, and if it was okay, I'd be back in 3 weeks during the summer. She agreed with that, and the 3 weeks hasn't ended yet, so.
Still here.
Still here. I've lived here, and I've been to a lot of places racing and living. I lived in Philadelphia for a while. I was racing out of Philadelphia. That was when I raced a Formula car. I've lived in the Virgin Islands. I went to the Virgin Islands to talk Roy out of a race car, which never did happen. And Roy's being in the Virgin Islands, it's a whole nother story. I mean, I can tell you that.
Tell me about it.
Roy called me in 1972 and asked me if I'd be interested in going to the Virgin Islands with him. He was going to move there, or he was going to go there and train some mechanics at a Ford dealership. And I declined to do that because at that time I was making the transition from the hobby division to the late model sportsman division. And I was eager to get in the late models. So I turned Roy down on that invitation. But Roy, like I said, he was a race car driver, and he was a good race car driver. And one of the cars that he had was a car that a lot of people considered a car ahead of its time. It had a lot of stuff on it that was really neat. And Roy decided he was going to stay in the Virgin Islands. He wasn't going to come home anytime soon. So I called him in 1979 and I asked him if he would let me get that car and race it. And he said, "Why don't you come down here and we'll talk about it?" I said, "Okay." So I went to the Virgin Islands on him. He paid for it.
Sounds like a good deal to me.
Yeah. And I stayed there for 2 weeks. And we talked about everything except that race car. Every time I'd bring it up, he'd change the subject. So at the end of 2 weeks, I had to come back. Or needed to anyway. So I came back home, and without the car, obviously, but I had a wonderful time and enjoyed being in the Virgin Islands for that period of time. And then I continued racing as I was, with the car that I had. And then in 1980, I decided I'd call him again. So I did. He did the same thing. Why don't you come down here? Well, I had experience in the Virgin Islands by then, so yeah, I'll go. So I went back to the Virgin Islands, and I stayed there. It's kind of like what I did to my mother, I guess. I stayed there a week at a time for a total of, I was in the Virgin Islands and Puerto Rico for a total of 7 years. And then I came back, still without that race car. I never got it. But I did start racing a little later, started racing open wheel modified car for a friend of mine. And Roy was involved with that as well over the phone. I mean, he was thrilled that I was racing. I was still racing, but he was thrilled with that. He wanted to know if he could assist me, if he bought me a race car, if he could assist me in the setup of it and all. I said, sure. So he wanted to buy a leaf spring car, and I'm sure you don't know what that is. But,
No.
And I agreed to that.
Well, you gotta tell me what it is.
Well, everybody else was running coil springs on the rear of the car. It has to do with the suspension of the car. Everybody else was running coil springs. Roy, at the time he quit racing and went to the Virgin Islands, they were running on leaf springs. And he was really good with leaf springs. And he was one of those people that didn't want to change anything unless it was absolutely necessary. And he wasn't convinced that the coil springs were better than the leaf springs. So to satisfy his own curiosity, he wanted to put my car on leaf springs. And with him paying the bill, I was all for that, so we did that. And I was able to win races with that car, but it wasn't a really competitive car for a long period of time. And leaf springs would work you to death, so we eventually got away from that.
Are you tired of cookie cutter fashion? Yearning for a wardrobe that screams you? Look no further. A&M Boutique is here to turn your style fantasies into reality with our stunning custom printed shirts. Why choose A&M Boutique? You can unleash your creativity, there's limitless design options, and premium quality every time. How to create your custom masterpiece? Contact us at A&M Boutique on Facebook.com. Elevate your wardrobe with A&M Boutique, where every shirt is a masterpiece waiting to happen. Your style, your print, your statement.
Okay, so Roy was able to see the difference in the leaf springs and the coil springs when he made a trip to the racetrack here. He came to Kingsport, and he was able to see the difference in the two. The cars that I was racing against the car was racing for him. And I say for him, it was my car, but it was for him, in a sense. And unfortunately, before we get a whole lot more done with that, Roy got sick and passed away. Now, Roy was also involved with other people's race cars as well. He had the Myers brothers. He sponsored a modified car for one of the Myerses. I can't remember which one it was. Or it may have been both of them, I don't know. But they weren't local. They were just, they were from someplace else.
Not Newport.
Not Newport.
Not the Virgin Islands either. When you moved to Newport with Eddie, how did Eddie influence you to start racing here in Newport?
Well, one of the things that Eddie was going to do was start racing himself. And I was going to help him race. He never did get started while he was here. He did start later in life, but he didn't do that while he was here. Eddie and Bobby divorced, and Eddie moved away. Well, they both moved away. And I stayed here. I was fortunate enough to meet other people, in this area.
Who did you meet from this area? When you say other people, who else influenced you here from this area? Alexis Photography. Make your prom night an everlasting memory with Alexis Photography, your trusted partner in capturing the magic, glamour, and elegance of this special occasion. Located in the heart of Newport, Tennessee, our dedicated prom photography services promises you to turn your fleeting moments into timeless treasures. Why choose Alexis Photography? Personalized photo sessions, expert posing guidance, stunning backdrops and sets, comprehensive packages to suit your needs, enhanced editing for picture-perfect results. Contact us on Facebook at Alexis Photography. Secure your prom photography session at Alexis Photography on Facebook to add a touch of sparkle to your magical night, because your prom deserves to be remembered in the most glamorous frames.
Eddie and I both worked for Don at a Don owned the gas station at Three-Way Inn, and Don was a racer as well. Don had quit racing at the time we moved here, or to the best of my ability he had anyway, the best of my memory. He had quit racing. Don and LD were rivals on the racetrack, from what I understood.
Mm-hmm.
I've heard some wild stories between the two of them, and LD didn't mention that, but I think they did exist.
Mm-hmm.
But Don was one of the people. Rod Long, even though he didn't live in Newport, was another person that I met. He was, Eddie had met Rod at some point, I'm not sure when, but Rod was a character. I mean, he was a real character. And Rod was involved with LD. Rod was involved with everybody. I mean, he really was a good guy, Rod was. And I wish LD had mentioned Rod. He could tell you a lot of stories about him.
Do you have a story about Rod? Do you like
Well, I don't, but Rod's son, and I are friends. His name's Jerry, and Jerry and his wife live in Morristown, and I don't think we've ever raced together. In fact, Jerry's told me he saw me race at Kingsport, and I'm not sure where else, but Jerry's a good guy. He's like his dad, I guess, in that respect. He's a good guy, a good friend.
LD talked about a story in his podcast about you having a ride in the back of the truck. Can you elaborate on that story a little bit, or tell your perspective?
I can. This goes way back. When I was going to the races with Roy, there'd be Roy and Rabbit and Big Al and myself, and there was times that there wasn't room to ride in the cab of the truck, and I'd have to ride in the back of the truck in order to go, and God knows I was going to go, so I did that. My riding in the back of the truck had nothing to do with anything other than space. Okay. Now, that was back during the time before segregation. Now, I had to sit in the truck a lot of times when we'd stop to eat. They'd go in and eat, and I'd have to wait for them to bring me something back, because I wasn't allowed to go into the restroom. That was before I ever moved to Newport. That was when we were still living in Nashville. That's another one of the things about Roy. We went to New Jersey to race once, and I didn't have to ride in the back of the truck to New Jersey. And we stopped at a place to eat, and Roy said, "Come on, sport, you can go in with us." And I looked at him like he was crazy because I knew I wasn't allowed to go in. But he said, "No, you can come in." And sure enough, I was at that point able to go in, sit, and eat with them. That's one of the stories I have with Roy, or had with Roy.
And all of those men that were in the racing world, they called you Snowball. Can you explain to me that nickname and how that makes you feel now?
When I was a kid, that was okay with me. That was fine that they called me Snowball. It was a name that somebody threw out there, and it just stuck. And the older I got, the more I disliked it. And to the point now to where kids at school will bring that up occasionally, and I'll ask them not to do that. I'd rather not be called Snowball.
Hold on one second. For those that are listening, when you bring up kids at school, can you tell them what you do for a living now, real quick?
I'm an automotive technology teacher at Cobb County High School.
Okay. And kids now, in 2024, know of that nickname that you had?
Some of them, yes, they do. But like I said, I would rather not be called that name. And the kids respect me, and they respect that, I think. When I asked them not to do that, then they didn't do it. So we just stick with Mr. Bethea at school.
Mm-hmm.
So.
Does the nickname bother you, or did it bother you when other people call you that now? That they recognize you of that?
There's so many people that only know me by that name. And even though I try to discourage anyone from using that name, there are people that just, that's all they know. And if they're making reference to me, then that's what they use. I don't know how to break them from doing that. I'm not going to get upset with them for doing that. LD does it occasionally, and I'd just rather not be called that, especially around new people or people that I'm just meeting. I don't want to be introduced as Snowball, or I just rather it not come up. But God knows, it's followed me a long ways. Even to the Virgin Islands, it followed me.
Really?
It did.
There's another situation that I want to talk about, that you were treated a little unfairly. That was in Rogersville. Can you tell me about that?
I can. In 1968, the 4th of July, never will forget that, I guess, we went to Rogersville to a race. We got there, we were a little bit late, and I don't know what the guy was to the racetrack, but I asked him when we qualified, when did we qualify? And he said, "We don't qualify here, we draw." I said, "Okay, where do I draw?" He said, "We've already drawn for you." I said, "Okay, where do I start?" He said, "You start last." I said, "Okay." Now, I didn't feel real well about that, but that was part of life back then. And I started last, and I worked my way to the front. I didn't lead the race, but I didn't make it to the front before I broke the steering arm and had to pit. But at least they knew I was there. So.
and that's all that matters.
And I've got a bad habit sometimes of saying I, and I really don't mean that because it's we. I didn't do any of this stuff by myself. I had help with me, and all the people that's helped me along the way, I really appreciate them, even though I failed to mention them. A lot of names that I don't remember. But people have. There's been really, really good people that's helped me a lot, and I really appreciate that.
Another quote that when I was researching you, Randy, that you said was that you were not a black race car driver. You were just a driver that happened to be black. And I think about when I speak to you, especially like when we spoke before, I thought of that and I was like, how, like you are just such a good human. Like I have, as a competitor myself, I think I would have probably had different reaction than what you had.
Well, racing is something that I chose, and I didn't choose it because I was black. I didn't think about history. I didn't think about anything other than what was taking place at the time I started racing. So I just, I don't know, people would want to talk to me or take pictures with me or whatever, and I did that, but it wasn't what I was there for. I was there to race. And I guess everybody could see the significance of me being there, a black person being there. God knows, the only black person at a racetrack. But I wasn't a black person. I was a race car driver, and that's what I was. And the blackness had nothing to do with it, So not to me. I mean, I just wanted to race, and that's just the way I felt about that. And that's the way I've always felt about it. I don't know, just.
But you do have a significant piece to NASCAR's history. You're only one of seven African American NASCAR drivers to race in history. How does that make you feel? Does that make you grin sometimes, at least?
I guess it does. I participated in a movie once, and that movie was about Wendell Scott. And Wendell Scott obviously was a black race car driver. He was one of the first black race car drivers. Now, my participation in that movie, I was in my race car driving on the racetracks at wherever we were. But I wasn't being shown. I couldn't be shown because it was about the only black race car driver that there was, and that was Wendell. My participation had to do with the money that I earned, basically. I mean, it wasn't about blackness, or it wasn't about being one of a few, or it was just an opportunity to earn money. And so I could race some more.
So you were like, movie opportunity, and you weren't Wendell Scott in the movie.
Right.
And you told me that. You said, no, I'm not an actor.
Right.
So that's why they didn't pick you.
Richard Pryor was the person that played Wendell Scott. I did have the opportunity to meet Richard Pryor and Rosie and Pam Grier and, a few people, but that were actors. But it wasn't me. I was just a racer, and that's what I was there for.
And
If that answered your question, it may not have.
It did.
Okay.
It did. And then you talked about a movie about Wendell Scott, but you were in a documentary in 2012 called Just Another Racer. Can you tell me a little bit about that documentary and how this is a little bit different from that documentary?
That's kind of a tough question, I guess. The documentary took place here in Newport. In fact, it was at school. And to be honest with you, I've done a lot of interviews with newspapers and some of the radios and stuff, and I kind of thought that that's what we were doing, you know, just another interview. I didn't realize that it turned into what it did.
But there was people in that documentary, and I wanted to ask you about some of those people, because I watched the documentary to an extent. Stanley Allison, who is he in relation to you? Because he's in that documentary as well.
Stanley Allison was a person that I met in Nashville. Stanley came over to Roy's shop to... Roy was real knowledgeable about Fords. Stanley raced Fords. Stanley and I don't know if LD drove a Ford for him. LD did drive for Stanley at one point. But anyway, Stanley bought a car from Roy and brought it back to Newport. Now, I had no clue at the time he did that what was going to happen with that car. I never thought anything about it. It was just a race car and it went away, and that was what I knew. That car, once I moved to Newport and got reacquainted with Stanley, I later worked at Kick-Ladder Ford, which is where Stanley worked as a mechanic. And Stanley and I talked about racing a lot. And Stanley had the car, that same car, and this was some years later, you know, that from the time he bought the car. It ended up being the first race car I ever drove. That car, Roy's old car, which was Stanley's car, which was the car that we put together and I raced. And Stanley, from that point on, was always a part of my life. Stanley was like a father to me. I raced for him. We had other people, or Stanley had other people driving the upper division, and I participated in working with them on the other cars. Stanley had, the first driver he had that I was familiar with was Charlie Smeltzer. Charlie raced a car that belonged to LD Roberts. And LD Roberts also worked at the Ford place with Stanley. And from Charlie, I think Stu McMahon drove Stanley's car, or LD's car, which Stanley was the crew chief of that car. Stanley was the crew chief of everybody's race car. Stu McMahon drove for him, and I worked on that car. And then Chet Williams drove for Stanley. Well, it turned from LD Roberts' car to Earl Williams' car. And Earl was the owner. Stanley was the crew chief, and I was the guy, one of the people that helped with the car. Chet and I became real good friends, and Chet, it thrilled me, like in 1972 when Roy called me and asked me to come to the Virgin Islands with him. And I declined because I had the opportunity to move up into the same division that Chet was racing in, and I didn't want to miss that opportunity. So that was a real thrill. And this was all part of Stanley, you know, and like I said, he was like a father to me.
And Stanley, he helped you with the car that had you sitting on the pole against Darrell, right?
He did. That was at Nashville Fairgrounds. And I've had a lot of people look at me funny when I say sit on the pole.
I'm one of those.
In NASCAR, they have a qualifying process, and the pole position is awarded to the person that's the fastest qualifier of that race. And so I was the fastest qualifier, so it's called setting on the pole. That's pole position, you know, for the start of the race, and that's where that comes from.
And you talked about the level playing field that you had. Can you explain that? As in your car, the level playing field of your car that race?
My car was competitive during that race because I was able to obtain extra sponsorship or something happened to where I had money to buy the same tires and have the good equipment like everyone else had. And one of the things about racing is that people, you know, unless you're just rich, which none of us were rich. We got parts from the junkyard, or we got parts from where we could get them from. We borrow them or whatever we had to do to get stuff. Tires was something that you had to have good tires in order to go fast. I didn't always have money to buy tires with. And it wasn't because I was black, it was just because that was just the way it was. There was a lot of white people that didn't have money to buy tires. When I was able to get good stuff to race good with, to run good with, then I was as competitive as a lot of the other guys.
The best of the best, yeah.
The best of the best, yeah. And that's what happened at the fairgrounds. I had a good car. I had Stanley was the engine man of every car I've ever driven, I think, except what race formula cars. But I had the good equipment and just needed good tires. I got good tires and was able to run well in that race, or set on pole anyway.
Who's Darrell? Can you explain to me who Darrell Winthrop is?
Darrell Waltrip.
Waltrip.
Darrell he became a NASCAR legend, and he a real good race car driver. The fairgrounds was his home track.
It's a stomping ground.
That was his stomping ground, yeah. And Darrell ran real good there, won a lot of races at the fairgrounds. If I had an opportunity to race Darrell with equal equipment, I would just love that. I would love to do that. Now, at the fairgrounds, when I did sit on the pole, I was real eager to outrun Darrell. And when we started the race, Darrell, because I drove in a corner a little deeper than I should have, Darrell was able to drive off with me, and before I could gather my car back up. And then a little later on in the race, I developed an oil leak. It had nothing to do with Stanley, or it had nothing to do with anything other than just an oil leak. So I had to quit. I had to pit my car. And so I didn't really have the opportunity at that time to race against Darrell. But if I had was on equal footing, I would love to race against, well, not just Darrell, a lot of people.
Who else would you, put it this way, if you had a rival back in the day, did you have one? Who did you always want to be better than? Because I know, I told LD the same thing. I was an athlete, and there was always that one person. I was like, okay, bring it on. Let's go. Did you have that one person?
I can't say that I did. I really can't say that. I mean, I would love to race against a lot of people, like LD, for instance. I would love to have equal equipment and race against LD. I did have the opportunity to race with Chet and with equal equipment, and in my eagerness to outrun him, I ended up crashing. But I did come from behind him and catch him, and and that was a thrill. Even though I crashed, it was still a thrill, too. And that wasn't. I mean, it wasn't like it was a rival. I mean, we raced out of the same shop, so it was just one of those things.
Just competition.
Just competition.
So you've talked about LD, you've talked about Darrell. Now you told me a story of Earnhardt. Can you explain that story?
I met Earnhardt, and it was in 1972, I think it was, at Daytona. And I talked to him in the garage area, and that was before. Well, I can't say before he was Earnhardt. I mean, he was always Earnhardt, but
before people knew him.
Yeah, he was just on, just like myself. He was somebody that was there that hadn't raced at Daytona at that time. To my knowledge, he hadn't anyway. And we talked about, or he had asked me, how do you get around this damn place,
Yeah.
And, I've left about that. I mean, he became...
possibly one of the most famous.
Yes.
Yeah.
He is one of the most famous drivers, or was one of the most famous drivers. A lot of respect for what he was able to accomplish. But I just had a brief meeting with him at that time, and that's my story about him. So
It's pretty cool. Can you tell me now about the big race, the 1975 Winston?
The World 600
Yes.
at Charlotte. I was fortunate enough, I guess, to get a ride for that race in D.K. Aldrich's car. It was a great opportunity for me, but and during that time it was money wasn't around. I mean, still didn't have money to do stuff with. But I started that race and ran halfway through it and blew the engine in that car. And still, it was just a race. It was me just racing, but I was racing against some of the top drivers in the sport, at that time, or I was on the racetrack with them anyway.
Mm-hmm.
After that race, you may or may not want this, but I'll throw it out here anyway. After that race, I was in the tower with Humpy Wheeler. Humpy was the promoter of the Charlotte Motor Speedway, and Humpy said that there was how did he say it? there was a future there for me, you know, something to that extent. And he said, you should come back over here and let's sit and talk about, you know, what's available for you. And then he said, or I could come to Newport. Well, all he had to say was he could come to Newport because that suited me just fine because I didn't have the money to run back and forth to Charlotte.
And what was your transportation?
My tow truck was all I had, so I welcomed the opportunity for him to come to Newport. But he never came. He never showed up. I feel like that was a missed opportunity for me. And it should have been. I mean, I should have done whatever it took to get back over there, but I didn't do that, so I don't know what may have happened had I gone over, but it just didn't happen. But there's been other opportunities that I've had like that. I had one opportunity to drive for someone that I never met. I never met that person. But I didn't take that opportunity because I couldn't take Stanley along as the crew chief. They had their own crew chief and they didn't Stanley, so I just felt like I didn't need to go there. So another missed opportunity. The race that I participated in was my favorite. I mean, I just loved racing. I still do. So I can just, you know, the pole position at Nashville, that's not a big to do. Well, wait a minute, let me back up. I guess Bristol might be. Bristol it's a short, high bank, real fast racetrack. And I that would be one of my favorite tracks, I guess. If that's what you're asking.
Yeah.
Okay.
And why did you quit racing? And when?
I got old and broke. I quit in, I'm pretty sure it was in 2013. I'm pretty sure it was. You know, it's funny that you'd ask that after all the things that I've been through, and I have come to realize that history does play a part in your life. You would think that I would have taken the time to figure out what, you know, when my last race was, where it was, the whole thing. But I can't 100% tell you that.
You were just there to race.
I was just there to race, and that was it. I'm gonna say 13 and hope that was right.
Do you wish you could race again? Or do
I
you
do.
plan on it? Ever?
I'll never say never.
So if somebody said, get in this race car right now, would you drive?
Probably would. I probably would.
So if you're out there and you're hearing this, and you want to see Randy race again, we just need a race car. It's no big deal. We just need a race car.
Yeah. A good one.
Very good one. Because we like to win.
Yeah.
And he'll, I already know what sitting on a pole means, so I mean, I guess I could be on the pit crew.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's like, watch. Well, Randy, thank you for breaking barriers in racing and for being an amazing man. You are an inspiration to many and a legend in NASCAR in Cobb County. You have had an influence on many children in Cobb County as an automotive tech teacher. As everyone can see from the Facebook post, your students are sharing it by the hundreds. You are very valued and loved in our community, and thank you for being on our podcast today.
Well, thank you for taking the time to do it. I'm glad I could do it. Anytime.
Do you have any special thank yous that you want to add in?
Again, I'd like to thank all the people that's helped me. I really would. And I can't name the people by names, and if I start naming one and I leave one out, then that wouldn't be good. So just thanks to everyone, especially family and friends. Thank you for all that you've done.
It is with immense gratitude that I extend my heartfelt appreciation to Randy Bethea for gracing our podcast with his presence. Having him share his insights and experiences has not only enriched our content, but has also left an undeniable mark on our listeners, especially the younger generation. Randy Bethea's presence on our podcast went beyond the racetrack. It showcased the embodiment of humility, resilience, and the spirit of breaking barriers in NASCAR. His journey serves as a beacon of inspiration for kids, proving that with passion, dedication, and an unwavering spirit, dreams can indeed become a reality. As a role model, Randy Bethea effortlessly connects with young minds, illustrating that success is not solely measured by victories, but also by the values one upholds along the way. His humility in the face of triumphs and challenges alike resonates with our audience, imparting invaluable life lessons that extend far beyond the world of racing. Randy's trailblazing efforts in NASCAR have shattered the preconceived notions and paved the way for future generations. He has not only raced against the odds, but he has broken barriers, leaving an enduring legacy for inspiring racers and enthusiasts alike. In extending our deepest gratitude to Randy Bethea, we recognize his contribution not only to the sport, but to the broader narrative of perseverance, passion, and progress. We are honored to have had him as a guest on our podcast, and we look forward to continuing to share his remarkable story with our audience. Thank you, Randy Bethea, for being a beacon of inspiration, a humble soul, a true barrier breaker in the world of NASCAR. Your journey has undoubtedly left an everlasting impact, and we are privileged to have been a part of sharing it with the world. Thank you, Randy Bethea, once again, and thank you to our followers for listening. Please share, comment, and like, and stay curious for next time. Your host of the Whispers of the Smoky Mountains, Kaylin Cole.